Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
And hello to anyone who is listening to this on the Temple Beth Am podcast series. We did not make a lot of progress last week, at least in terms of movement through the verses. We made a lot of progress in terms of our ideas. Let's see what today brings us to. I have us having read, but not, I don't know if we finished the Rashis on verse 8. I forgot to mark it down. Did anyone mark it down if we finished the Rashis on verse 8? Okay. So just to get us going, I'll read verse 8 again. We're in the part of the story where the instructions are being given regarding Exodus night. Chapter 12, verse 8. They will eat the meat on that night. Tzli eish, roasted in fire, umatzot, and matzah. We're not going to relitigate that, but there's a question as to what the and is. Does the matzah connect to how it's being cooked or how it's being served? And then al merorim, on bitters, yochluhu, they will eat it. And we discussed that the plural of merorim is understood halachically to mean that there's not just one bitter herb, that there are many things that one could possibly eat. And we looked at some medieval sources that reminded us that we could even fulfill obligation for maror on endive. Did we start reading the Rashi, Lo Hagidim, the sinews? Did we read that? Yeah. We did that. Did we do the next one about Vayamaru et Chayehem? We stopped mid-sentence?
On Vet Sivam.
Okay. So let me finish off this Rashi just to get us going, and then we'll choose someone else to read 9. So on the words al merorim, Rashi said, Kol esev mar nikra maror. Any bitter vegetable or vegetation can be called maror. So I think what he's going for is, if you think of maror as a technical term, then it's hard to understand what the plurality of the word means in the verse. Does it mean there's a single species named maror and you need to have more than one of them? Rashi says, no, maror is a generic term for bitter things, and on any sort of marors, you can eat this korban pesach with. And then Rashi gives the reason why shetzivam lechol maror, and God commanded them to eat maror, zecher le, as a memory of, as an homage to, going back to chapter 1, verse 14, if you want to just pull back the beginning of the book of Shemot, the verses we read a long time ago, when the beginning of the enslavement happens and their life gets hard. If you go to chapter 1, verse 13, Vaya'avidu Mitzrayim et bnei Yisrael b'farach, the Egyptians worked, see that word avidu, here's working as a transitive verb, like to work them to death. Worked the children of Israel b'farach, with great distress, with great cruelty. And then vayemararu et chayehem, they embittered their lives. So there, marar is operating as a verb in describing what happened to their lives. And so Rashi says, as if it weren't obvious, that's why the food we eat when we leave that situation is evocative of our experience in that situation, Vayamaru et Chayehem, which basically quotes the verse. Okay. Questions or comments on that? Okay. Last call. I don't see anyone in person or on Zoom. Okay. Let's go to verse 9. Rebecca, you want to read verse 9? You could do rock, paper, scissors. Cross each other. That's perfect. I realized I was doing it by accident the moment I was saying it. I was like, Rebecca. For those of you on Zoom, Rebecca's are sitting across from each other, and I thought Rebecca, but I didn't look at the table before I mentioned it.
Okay. אל תאכלו ממנו נע, ובשל מבושל במים. That's a little bit like לך לך. כי אם צלי אש ראשו על קרעיו ועל קרבו.
Okay.
Okay, so don't eat it raw.
Okay.
and it's either cooked or overcooked or fully cooked in water.
And how would you connect the two phrases, or would you connect the two phrases? On the one hand, al tochlu menuna, don't eat it raw, and then this phrase that stands by itself, uvashel mubushal b'mayim, surely cooked in water. What's the connection between those two phrases?
I think the al refers to both, meaning both.
Right. So in English, we might say neither this nor that.
Right.
And we'll see how Rashi handles it. It's a little bit tricky because the al, it doesn't say al tochlu menuna ve al tochlu oto b'shem u'b'shalom. They're just an and. Don't eat it raw. And in English, we'd have to put another negative in there. In Hebrew, you may not need that. And very, very well cooked in water. Go ahead.
Right. Well, the key is sort of where it breaks and is the but.
Right.
Ki im tzli esh rosho al kra'av al kirbo. So rather roasted in fire, its head on its thighs, and kirbo, I assume, is its internal organs or inside.
Right.
So the entire animal, basically.
Okay, so the first half of the verse seems to, until the etnachta, right, the wing bone trup, seems to tell you how you shouldn't be eating it, neither raw nor boiled. And then the key seems to say, but rather do it this way. The first words after the key is information that we know already from the previous verse, right? Roasted in fire. And then something about its head and its legs and its innards, but we're not sure what to do with the prepositions al, because al generally means what? On. So if we translate it literally, which is not a good thing to do because Hebrew doesn't work that way, its head, on its legs, and on its innards. Hard to make sense of that. So we'll have to see what we think that word al can also mean. But you're understanding it as a general idea, Rebecca, is just saying what? What's it saying when those three phrases together, Rosho, al kra'av, al kirbo?
It's in its entirety. I think if you would look at it from a modern Hebrew perspective, that would be the sort of natural way to understand it as the entire, like the family on its children, al yiladav, al ninav, and all that. So the entire animal.
Good. Mentioning component parts representing a whole, you might even call that, Alan Brody, a version of a merism, right? Because it's not suggesting that you only eat its head and only, it could, but we don't think it's saying just eat its head and its limbs and its innards. It's a way of saying all of it, right? Okay. On the verse itself, language, content, Trupp, who wants to ask or say something? I see you, Rick. Go ahead.
Good morning. So I just wanted you to know, in my Silverman, the translation is nor sodden at all, Sodden, which I thought was like waterlogged. I know uvashel mevushel is about cooking, but the English has nor sodden at all. I don't get that. So that's a question. And then I just wanted to point out that Onkelos has la techlun and then af la vashala. So he does put in another and not this.
Very good. So that's a wonderful pickup on Onkelos, which tells us one of two things maybe. Either that Onkelos thought it was sufficiently unclear in Hebrew that when he translates it into the Aramaic, he adds in the neither and the nor, the second negative, or, and I just don't know which is the case, it's just in colloquial Aramaic, you have to put in the second loaf for it to make sense, where it's in biblical Hebrew, you may not, right? The biblical Hebrew and first century Aramaic are different languages. They're related to each other, but the grammar has evolved and the syntax has changed. So I'm not sure if he's clarifying intentionally what he thinks is unclear in the Hebrew, or that's just how you say that in Aramaic, right? Good. Anyone else? Yeah, Elon, get the microphone.
So this is more of a content question, which is, if you look at the previous verse, it's kind of obvious common sense of why we eat bitter herbs, right, with the matzah. This seems to be gratuitously specific, and there's no obvious reason why it is gratuitously specific. And I don't know if Rashi deals with that, But if I'm an Israelite in looking to escape Egypt and I'm getting this command, I'm like, dude, seriously, come on. So
why does it matter how it's prepared? Is that really the
yeah,
question?
why the specificity?
Yeah.
Does Rashi say, well, here's why?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question because Rashi does want to make sure we understand the why of the maror, but doesn't go there on the why of the tzli'esh. Off the top of my head, I don't know of. It doesn't mean that there isn't. I don't know of a medieval commentator who does go there. Rashi takes that at face value, right? We could
Rabbi, can I
theorize as to what the significance is.
Rabbi,
Who is
can I
that?
jump in out of
Larry?
order? Yeah, can I jump in out of order?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Elon's
Speak a little bit louder. If someone can up the volume of the speaker.
Okay, 1 second.
Loud for
I'm
you?
going to fix your computer.
Okay. All right.
Oh.
Then don't do that. Just Larry,
All right.
speak louder to this side of the room if you don't mind.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I had the same question as Elon, and I turned to Robert Alter, and he answered it.
Okay.
So this is
Ask and ye shall receive.
This is a little bit long, so forgive me. Do not eat. Well, he cites the verse. Eating raw meat, still suffused with blood, would in any case have been prohibited. But elsewhere, there's no restriction on boiled meat. Here, that would be lamb stew, whether for sacrificial or profane purposes. William H.C. Propp offers what may be the best explanation for this insistence on fire roasting by observing that it is a more archaic method of cooking meat without the use of a pot, cooking utensils being instruments of a more complex culinary technology. In this fashion, he goes on to suggest fire roasting would be associated with a kind of purity in the preparation of the meal, just as flatbread, probably baked over an open fire nomad style, and I'm adding my comment of last week about our experience in the Sinai when the pita matzah was made right over the fire without any utensils whatsoever, without any admixture of leaven, might be associated with purity. One could add that these archaically prepared foods enhance the sense of ritual reenactment of what amounts to an archaic moment of national history, when the nation itself was awaiting its foundational liberation as a destroying angel stalked through the Egyptian night and passed over the houses of the Israelites.
Right.
In other words,
what Alter is saying, 1 second, Larry, is that what we're reading, which in the rhythm of the text is being told to the Israelites that night by God, Alter is clearly understanding it as that which was written later for us to think about as we commemorate that iconic moment of departure. And therefore, ex post facto, the kind of nostalgic, pure preparation of the meat is put into the story. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
Was your hand up for another reason too?
No. It was exactly that. But Elon's question was so appropriate. I jumped in.
So I'm going to jump in because I can't but think that this is a model for how we should be observing Pesach in our day, which is minimizing the prepared foods and the utensils and everything, and really simplifying.
Yeah. Don't get me started. We've ungepatched and inverted Pesach even more than we've ungepatched and converted kashrut itself, and we've ungepatched kashrut, right? We've really turned the modern observance of Pesach into the antithesis of what its original intent was. We've made it prohibitively expensive and therefore oppressive and potentially overly bitter for the people who have to prepare. And we have commercialized it to the point of it's no longer a burden because everything is available that is a facsimile of regular food, in which case, what are we really worshiping? We're just worshiping the modern technological ability to create fake Cheerios, right? Like, so you're right. As the next verse, yeah.
Amen.
Right, and it troubles me. What's that?
Amen. And where you poskin, we will follow on this, please.
All right, I got to think about that. That's a signed check right there. Rebecca, David, and then I see Renee.
So regarding the why not raw and not overcooked in water or something, it could be that it has to do with, I recall somewhere when you talk about this fachim, there's a business of smell, reach nichoach, and the smoke, and it could be that it's just alluding to the fact that when you sacrifice, something is supposed to actually go up there, and you get that when you grill.
Yeah, in a different way than if you just boil it in water.
Yeah.
Good. David, and then Renee. Let's bring David the microphone.
Just saying regarding the manner of cooking, we're talking about rosho al ka'av al kirbo. Perhaps you have to cook it stacking up on top of each other.
So if you want to make sense of really the al, it's almost like a
shawarma.
a gyro. Good. Renee. We don't hear you yet, Renee.
Everett Fox writes, don't eat any of it raw or boiled in water. Not sure why he specifies boiled twice. And the other thing I wanted to ask is from the way that they describe the way of it's being cooked and roasted. Yeah, I don't know. It made me think of the shank bone.
Well, yeah, I mean, because the shank bone is our memory of this. Correct. It's exactly right, because we don't do Korban Pesach. It's the one thing on the Seder plate that kind of connects us to the way the ancients observed the holiday. Yeah.
But why boiled in water?
Yeah. You mentioned Everett Fox's translation. I had that teed up because I wanted you to see it, so it's on the screen now. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled, boiled in water. The boiled, boiled is his rendering of the bashel muvushal, right? That doubling. Sometimes he'll do it as boiled. Yes, boiled in water. He adds in he turns the key into a but rather, very similar to how Rebecca translated it, but rather roasted in fire, its head along with its legs, along with its innards, not shawarma style, the way David's reading it. And his commentary on that, and Everett Fox normally does not comment, but he does when he's translating it in a way that he knows that the reader might think, hey, that's not exactly what it says in the verse. And he's telling you what he thinks it means. That is completely consumed, as Rebecca understood it. Okay. Yes, Barry.
So looking at the troping,
Done. Are you up?
Go ahead.
Looking at the troping, which you had suggested at the beginning, and maybe a little redundant in what we're saying here, but so the first is don't eat it raw or half cooked, okay, or boil the water. So that's done. And then we go kimi at tzli eish rosho al kirbo. So we're not going to roast any of these parts separately, but they have to be roasted together. So they're roasting the head with the legs, the head with the innards. So it's all roasted together. How you stack it, I don't know, but they have to be done together. And I think that's what's significant here.
Yeah, it seems to be. And Rashi is going to say something similar. And Rashi is going to bring us to a place in Tanakh where the word al is even more obviously representing kind of a totality as opposed to simply the word on. And you're saying, Rebecca, that still works in modern Hebrew? Yeah. That you can use a series of al's to mean everything? Okay, so it carried through. That's interesting because not all biblical etymology carries through to modern. Okay, anything else in the verse where we look at Rashi? Okay, Rebecca, still on? Al tochlu mimenu na.
אל תאכלו ממנו נע, שאינו צלוי כל צורכו קוראו נע בלשון ערבי. So don't eat it raw. Something that, whatever is not fully roasted is called na in, I guess, in Arabic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
I'm not sure what Rashi's question is, right? The only thing I can think of is that he's just sufficiently convinced that his readers will not associate the word na in their understanding of Hebrew with ra, but they somehow might know that it means that in a cognate language. It's unclear how he thinks it's helping his readers to say, you don't know what na means? You know how it means ra in Arabic? It means that here.
Well,
not sure,
it
but I'm
could
open.
mean please, right? Please don't eat from it.
Rather,
Like
lest you read it as a entreaty, read it as that version of raw. I see your hand up, Leonard.
I think the reason he's mentioning na here is because it's the only place in the Bible where it's used.
Is the hapax legomenon the entire Bible?
Correct. So,
Not to mean this, as opposed to
meaning raw.
Okay. Well, that's a good reason then.
So he can't point you to a different verse. So instead, he points you to a different language.
And since there are other nas in the Tanakh that means something else, he wants to make sure it means this and not that. Great, helpful, Alan.
There's a wonderful and surprising comment in the Saperstein edition about this.
Okay.
And they say some editions, such as the early Rome and Venice editions of Rashi, read Ivri, Hebrew, for Aravi, Arabic. According to Mishnas Yaakov, that reading is based on Rashi's commentary to Psachim 41a. The Talmud there defines na of our verse in terms of a Persian word, avardnim. Rashi there comments, quote, that kind of roasting, which is called arvanim in Persian, is called na in the Holy Tongue. A discussion of the various versions of this Rashi also appear in Yosef Hallel. See also Ibn Ezra to our verse.
Should we look and see what Ibn Ezra says? I had not looked at that. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
All right. Let me open it up. Hold on 1 second, David. Okay, let's see what Ibn Ezra says. It's on the screen. See if I can make it bigger. Oops, stop that. There may be. I don't. Hold the thought. Okay, Yesh omrim, some say, kasher hu ata shabasar chai. That the meaning of na means as it is right now, which is raw, uncooked. Uvederach hazot lo matzanu b'chol hamikra. So here Ibn Ezra is quoting Leonard Friedman. In this usage, we have not found a single instance in the entire Tanakh. V'acharim amru, others say, ki hu migzerat ki heini aviha ata. So some people say it's from the root lahani, which you know from, I think it's from Parshat Matot, maybe. Maybe it's earlier than that. Where it's what you can do regarding someone else's vow, which is to break it or to nullify it. V'hatam shavur. The meaning means broken. Ve'ein zenachon. That's not correct. Ki charkein amar ve'etzem lo tishperuvo. Because later on, we're going to have a verse that says that you should actually not break it up. You're supposed to be eating it whole. V'anachon beinai. And what seems right in my mind, she'ein lo chaver b'mikra. It's got no friend in the entire Bible. Hapax legomenon. Uperusho hafach mevushal v'hu shenikra chai. And what's that?
I think it's hafuch. Yeah, instead of
hafuch. I lost my place. Perusho hafuch mevushal v'hu shenikra chai. The opposite of cooked, and that is raw. Okay. All right, Rick's hand is up. And David was first. Let's give David the microphone.
regarding the word na, just remember that in Genesis 25:29, it says, "Vayomer Esav el Yaakov haliteni na min ha'adom ha'adom hazeh."
Right. So that's where there's the interchange between Yaakov and Esav on the porridge, and the na there probably means the please, like I'm begging you, right? So the word na does appear, but it doesn't appear meaning this. Although, you could read it into that haliteni na. I'm so hungry, I'll even eat it raw. But it's probably not what it means there. Also nanaf, yeah. Is the word for raw in modern Hebrew na? No, it's chai, right?
No.
It is na? Basar na is raw meat?
And also in Arabic, I know that there's a dish called kubanayat, which is like beef tartare.
Oh, beef tartare. Okay.
I've never tried it, but it's raw. It is raw.
What Rebecca said, she was on the microphone, is that in Arabic, kubanaya is like a raw beef tartare. Okay, so the word has lasted. I don't know if I've confronted it in modern Hebrew. Rick.
Again, my Silverman had a footnote to look at the Onkelos, and there it's lotel notechlun mine and then kad chai. So I don't know about the kad.
When it is chai, meaning raw. Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. Let's keep going with the Rashi. So Rebecca Shalev uvashel muvushal. Let's give her a microphone.
ובשל מבושל. כל זה באזהרת אל תאכלו. So I guess he's commenting just that the bashel mevushal is still part of the don't eat it raw.
Right.
And don't eat it cooked.
Exactly as you translated originally, Rebecca, but since it doesn't repeat the thou shalt not, he's making sure you understand that the phrase surely cooked in water is part of the thing you shouldn't do, as opposed to lest you think that the verse would have meant don't eat it raw, rather eat it cooked in water. No, don't eat it neither raw nor cooked in water. Okay, next.
Kim tzli esh.
Do you have one b'mayim about
that?
Oh,
sorry, yeah. B'mayim. Minayin l'sh'ar mashkin, Talmud lomar uvashel mevushal, mikol makom.
Okay, so what's his question and what's his answer?
So I think the question, I assume he's responding to the doubling of bashel mevushal, and he's learning from that it's, how do we know that it's not for other liquids besides water? So sort of, I don't know if the question is about how do we know which question you're referring to. That's what I mean.
Right. Or which direction did this thought process go? Did the thought process go, why is the verb form doubled? It must be to teach us this. Or did the thought process go, well, it says you shouldn't boil it in water. Does that mean it's only water you shouldn't boil it in? And then the answer is the Vashel Mubishal. Either way, there is either an intensification or a redundancy in the doubling of the verb. And since water is mentioned specifically, I suppose you could have the thought that, it's in this liquid that I'm not supposed to cook this in. Maybe what I'm allowed to do is to either roast it in fire or cook it in another liquid. The answer is no. You can't cook it in any liquid, and that is implied midrashically by the doubling of the verb, by shel muvushal. Alan, yeah?
That is exactly what's said in footnote 7 here, and referring to Psachim 41a, that the verses use of a single verb form, the infinitive of uvashel, when a single mivashel alone would have been sufficient,
right,
implies that the meat may not be eaten if it was boiled in any liquid, as it's Rashi to Psachim.
Correct.
Yeah, it just...
Yeah,
Saperstein is doing a good job.
He knew
today.
something that Saperstein. Well, Saperstein knew how to write a check, and the people he hired knew how to write commentary. Anything else on that one? Because Rashi has like 5 different comments in this verse. All right, next one. Kim tzli esh.
Kim tzli esh. למעלה גזר עליו במצוות עשה, וכאן הוסיף עליו לא תעשה.
Okay, translate that for a second.
So, but as roasted on fire, or a fire roasted, lemala, previously, I assume.
Right, and the previously is the previous verse. Right?
Right.
Previous verse says, "V'achlu et habasar b'layla hazeh tzli eshu matzot." So we already know it's supposed to be roasted in fire. Okay.
Right. So I guess he's saying previously it was a mitzvah, a positive commandment, v'kan osif alav lo, and here he adds a negative. Don't do it any other way either.
Right, and let me kind of flesh out that comment before we go further. Right, so in the rabbinic numerology of the mitzvot of the Torah, many of you know there are Taryag mitzvot, 613 mitzvot, and particularly in the Middle Ages, there was an intense effort to count them all. The two famous ones are by the Rambam and the Ramban, Maimonides and Nachmanides, and they don't agree. They agree on the number, but not on which of the mitzvot. And when they disagree on the mitzvot, they're not disagreeing as to what is or is not permissible or obligatory for a Jew. It's just which things count as a formal mitzvah from the Torah. It's not like one of them thinks you can eat treif, one of them does not. It's which one is drawn directly as the 613. And most every enumeration of the mitzvot divides into two numbers, 248 thou shalts and 365 thou shalt nots. And those are somewhat iconic numbers. 365 is the number of days in a solar year, as you know, and even our ancestors knew that, even though they were mostly living by the lunar calendar. And they consider 248 to be the number of limbs in the body, or organs, or aspects of the body. So the idea was that with every limb of your body, you've got a mitzvah that you're obligated to do, and on every day of the year, there's something you shouldn't do. Okay? Most mitzvot are in either one or the other. Right? But occasionally there is a concept where we are enjoined by the Torah both to do it this way and don't do it that way, and those are each considered mitzvot. And the reason why that's significant, well, let me ask you, why would it be significant or practically to have the same obligation or prohibition to be articulated and enumerated as a mitzvah as a thou shalt and a thou shalt not? What's the difference? How does it impact me as the person, as the Jew? Leonard?
Well, if you don't do it the right way, then you're violating both of them.
Okay, so on the basic level, it means that you've got two strikes against you if you didn't do it properly. And how else? What's that? And 2 for you if you're doing it right. How else could it literally practically impact you, Joel?
Well, aren't the punishments different?
And
also, women only have to do the negative ones.
Good. Let's start with the first one, right? So, in general, in the Talmud's expansion of the notion of reward and punishment that is laid out in kind of generic, concept in the Torah, most of the time the punishment for not doing something is heavier than the punishment for, most of the time the punishment for violating something you shouldn't have done is heavier than for not having done, a shev alta says, that for not having done what you were supposed to have done, right? So without getting into the nitty-gritty details, if you've got a mitzvah that's only articulated in the positive, that you must do it. If you don't do it, it's a relatively low slap on the wrist. But if there's a mitzvah that's articulated in the negative and you do it, that might bring a higher level of korban, a higher level of sinfulness. So if you have a mitzvah that appears in both, it means it's something that you must do, but by doing it the way you were not supposed to be doing it, you get into the category of violating a thou shalt not, and that's a higher punishment in the sacrificial system. In terms of the Talmudic understanding of exemption, women were not obligated to time-bound positive mitzvot. They're obligated to positive mitzvot, but they're not obligated to positive mitzvot that have to be done with a certain time, with several exceptions, right? So, but if a mitzvah is only articulated in the positive, and it's got a specific time in which it's supposed to be done, then according to most sections of the Talmud, women are exempt from that. Yeah. What's that? For example, well, the classic one that became the crux of the move towards egalitarian prayer in our movement was prayer, right? So if you consider prayer to be a positive mitzvah, which in and of itself is a question, because the Torah never commands us to pray, and prayer is supposed to be done at a certain time, right? There are zones for Shachrit, Mincha, Mariv. You could make the argument that a woman is exempt from that obligation, not prohibited, but exempt. And if she's exempt from the obligation, then she can't lead it for someone who is obligated, which is a man, right? And some of the exceptions are related to this night, 4 cups of wine. 4 cups of wine is a positive mitzvah, according to the Talmud, right? Each representing the languages of, but the languages of redemption, and they're time bound. It has to be done on Pesach night. And yet, according to rabbinic law, even in the Talmud, women were as obligated to drink the 4 cups of wine as men were. That Chanukah also, right? Women are equally obligated in the most strict interpretation of Jewish law as men to light the Chanukah and hear the Megillah. Yes, Barry.
What about lighting the Shabbos candles? That's time bound.
Yeah, lighting the Shabbos candles is an interesting one. The interesting thing about lighting a Shabbos candles is that it's certainly time bound in one way of thinking about it, right? Because after a certain time you're prohibited from doing it, but it doesn't live in the same kind of zone of time as some of the others. But right, that's one of the counterexamples. Stevie?
Say that lighting Shabbos candles takes on the status of mitzvah much later in Jewish history than these other things.
Right. We say Asher Kedushan Mitzvah Tzivanu as we do over Hanukkah, but and it's associated with the beginning of Shabbat. But the classic thou shalt regarding Shabbat are Zachor and are Zachor, which is remembering the Shabbat. And how do we observe the remembering of Shabbat? What's the Kiddush, right? And that's why in a more orthodox setting, a woman could not lead Kiddush because that's a positive time-bound mitzvah, and therefore they couldn't exempt others. And then the rabbis added on a positive mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat, of enjoyment of Shabbat, which is to make the Shabbat dinner festive and beautiful and things like that. Okay, where were we? Let's go back into the Rashi. You're still up, Rebecca. Yeah. Okay, so the first thing Rashi said is that it seems that you might ask the question, why in the previous verse does it say you must eat it roasted, and in this verse it says you should not eat it cooked, but rather roasted? It seems redundant. Rashi is saying what's happening here is that the previous mitzvah is a thou shalt. The second verse is putting the obligation to only eat it one way into a category of a thou shalt not. Keep reading.
Rosho al Kra'av.
So you skipped over just where he quoted the two phrases, right?
Al tochlu mimeno ki im tzli esh, right?
So the language of the thou shalt not in the second verse is how you shouldn't eat it. You should not eat it this way. But the Torah adds in, you should not eat it this way, but rather only eating it roasted, which suggests that by not eating it roasted, you have violated a thou shalt not, in addition to having violated a thou shalt. Okay? All right, Rosho al Kra'av.
Okay. Rosho al Kra'av. Tzolehu kulo ke'echad im Rosho ve'im Kra'av ve'im kirbo. Ubnei me'av noten letocho achar hadachatan.
Okay. Translate that.
So Rosho al Kra'av, roasting it kulo, the whole animal as one, right, with its head,
right, like a Polynesian pig, if you will, right, and not stacked up, right. So Rashi's not reading it. Rashi's not reading it the way David was suggesting you could read it, with the al literally meaning on top of. No, this is a way of saying it's in its entirety, with its head,
with its Krav, I think that's thighs specifically. Ve'im kirbo, with its inside. Ubnei me'av. So I assume that that's the me'aim, the intestines. Noten letocho, puts it in there. Achar dachatan, after washing, rinsing in like ladiach kelim, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And what Rashi's saying there is connecting to some. He's being a little bit anachronistic, but I want to share with you what he's doing because he's not making it explicit. So I'm going to share a verse. Okay, so at some point this class will get to Vayikra. I don't know what we're going to do then. I don't know. We're going to just have to skip the book. No, just kidding. Vayikra is going to be great. But when we get to Vayikra, we're going to start learning the details of the sacrificial system, which is connected on some level to our story because there's a sacrifice in Exodus night, but this is about how the sacrifices will be done in the temple. And the book of Vayikra and the Parsha of Vayikra begins with some general descriptions of how all sacrifices are be done. And look at verse 9, Vikirbo uchra'av yirchatz b'mayim, its innards and its legs you should wash in water. V'hiktir hakohen et kol hamizbecha, and you should, the priest renders all of it into incense on the altar. Olah, it goes up, going back to what Rebecca says, so the smoke rises, isherech nichoach l'Adonai, so that it's a fire with a pleasing smell to God. Interestingly, Rashi doesn't specifically quote this, but the super commentaries on Rashi point to this verse because it's in this verse that we're told that its innards, right, are supposed to be washed in water. It also says in this verse that its legs are supposed to be washed in water. But what they're pulling from this verse is if you're not allowed to cook this thing in water, in our verse, and you're supposed to do all of it together, but later on we learn that an overarching obligation with the sacrifices is to wash the guts, then Rashi says, obviously, you take them out, you wash them according to what it's going to be obligatory in the book of Vayikra, and then you put it back in, and then you roast it all together. It's a little bit well, it's not just the scene is messy and the commentary is messy, right? He's forcing God's instructions to Moshe and the Israelites on Exodus night to be answerable to the laws coming in Vayikra about how korbanot were done in the temple. Kathy and then Sue.
Before that, it was all together, the head, the body, and the legs. So here, the legs can't be washed.
9:30. Okay, keep going, Kathy.
So if it's all, this is all supposed to be done very quickly. I mean, they'd have to get it done. I mean, if you had to cut off the legs to wash them, and if you had to open the calf, the animal to take out the innards and wash them, that's a lot. And then maybe it would be stacked. But if it's all one, you just kind of throw the animal on the fire.
As you're using your hands, you're moving your microphone away from your mouth.
I'm sorry. If you keep, if you're going to do this fast, you're going to put the whole animal on the fire,
right?
And then cook it. But then you cut it up to eat it.
Right. I mean, it's a reminder there are aspects of the story that seem very sensitive to the rush the Israelites are in, and aspects that are not. Right. This is if Rashi's correct that the actual instructions were to include the removal of the innards, the washing and putting it back in before it's roasted, that's a very time-intensive process rather than just roasting the whole thing. Sue?
Well, thank God we don't do any of that. But it's
you don't?
Maybe you do. It's surprising. I know you don't. It's kind of surprising that we don't have like a Pesach luau, or that we're not eating whole lamb. We're not. We have so many of these rituals that that's what it is, and so that's what we do. But we don't do any of that.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting.
I don't know if you were in class that day that we were talking about the Samaritan Pesach. Were you there that day? We had a whole conversation probably about a month ago about Leonard and Rebecca. Was it both of you? Once we're in Israel and visited the Har Gerizim, where the Samaritans do Pesach, and they do that because that's what the Torah said to do. Right? We, eat fake Cheerios.
I think that
washing the legs, and for that matter, the head, doesn't necessarily mean they had to be removed and separated. When you take a lamb that's newly slaughtered that had been walking around, presumably its feet and part of the legs are dirty. And so it's important to clean them, but I think it could just be a more ordinary kind of cleaning, not salting and soaking and the gunsum gillah that we do nowadays with our meat. And taking the innards out is necessary because the liver, presumably they were going to broil that separately, maybe the whole innard separately. But taking that out and washing it may make some sense because it's whatever it is. And there may be undigested things in it. So, but the whole lamb then being, or kid, then being roasted whole, I don't think is inconsistent with having had at least part of it washed on the outside to get rid of any schmutz.
Yeah. Rachel, has your hand up?
I think that it's important to just kind of remind ourselves that there's a reason we don't do all this in our day-to-day practice and our Pesach celebration. And that's because there's not a temple. We're not bringing a sacrifice.
Right.
We're commemorating that our ancestors brought a sacrifice and that consequently, at least that's one explanation of why none of us sit down to a meal of roast lamb.
Yeah. It would be interesting to time travel back into an era, not only when the temple stood, but when the Jewish Israelite community existed, both pre-first temple and between the temples, right? So if we really try to historicize the return from exile, whether you attach it to the character Ezra or not, but Cyrus allows the Jews to go back, and some of them go back to Israel, land of Israel. It takes a while to build a second temple, not even taking into account Herod's expansion of it. To build that temple took a long time. Like, what was Pesach in Jerusalem, while the second temple is being built? What did Pesach look like in Babylonia, right? Or in Persia after Cyrus kind of sort of emancipated the Jews? Did they do something that was not on an altar, but akin to this? It was pre Masechet Pesachim. It was pre the 10th chapter of that Mishnah that talks about how a Seder is done. Was it more Seder-like, or was it more chapter 12 of Shemot-like? And we'll never know. But it is fascinating to try to imagine how they observed it for hundreds of years. Right? Okay, let's finish off this Rashi. Rebecca?
Or an umbrella.
What did I miss? I want to get every laugh.
I almost handed to an umbrella.
That's funny.
Maybe it works. Al kra'av ve'al kirbo.
One word before it. Velashon.
Velashon, sorry. Velashon. Al kra'av ve'al kirbo. And the language of al kra'av and al kirbo, so I guess it's going to be talking about the al.
Right.
Kilshon al tziv'otam.
Okay, so he says, you reader may be wondering, how do we make sense of this? I'll give you an al where it was obvious what it meant and it didn't just mean on. So everyone look back to chapter 6, verse 26. Should all have that because it's in Shemot. It's the very beginning of Parshat Va'era. Well, not the very beginning. It's towards the beginning of Parshat Va'era. Okay, so we mentioned there's a genealogy in the beginning of Va'era, and then Aaron is mentioned, and then the Torah says, "Hu Aaron," that very Aaron, Moshe, Asher Amar Adonai Lehem, to whom God had said, "Hotziu et Bnei Israel." Bring the Israelites out, Me'eretz Mitzrayim of Egypt, al tzivotam. Atzava is it means army in modern Hebrew, but it's a horde or an array, many of them, right? And clearly the al there did not mean bring them out while they're walking on other people's heads, right? The al there meant kind of with, right? Al upon meaning with, right? Bring them out with all of their numbers, right? And if it seems obvious to you, their reader, then import that all into our verse, and we've got a with all of these component parts. And then Rashi says, Shemot.
כמו בצבאותם, כמות שהן, אף זה כמו שהוא, כל בשרו מושלם או משלם?
Mishalem, yeah.
משלם.
Okay, so what is Shemot shehen?
As they are.
They're in the entirety of them, right?
Yeah.
Really, kamot or kmut or
Kmot.
Yeah, like as they are in their entirety. Same here, as it is in its entirety. Kol besaro, all of its flesh, mishalem, in its fullness, right? Mushlam could be, yeah. Either way, it means the entirety of the animal. Don't read the preposition al as being anything other than that. Okay, good. Thank you, Rebecca. That was a lot of Rashis. Alan?
Again, this is just, Saperstein is really hitting a home run today. It says, all can also mean next to. See Rashi to Numbers 220, or with. See Rashi at 3522. Rashi is saying that these meanings do not fit here.
Do not fit here.
Do not fit
Well,
here.
the
Those
with
two.
does.
Yes, but not next. Well, with, they're saying with is saying that these meanings do not fit here. And they say, see Mizrahi and Sifrei Chochamim.
I mean, it's very hard to do back and forth translation because we're thinking in English, but we're looking in the Hebrew, and it's hard to know when Rashi is correcting this version of al to that version of al. It's hard to know the exact right English word to put in there, but whatever it means, it doesn't mean on top of. Okay, good. Stevie. And then Kathy, sorry. Wait, hold on, Kathy.
Just that in all can also mean, right, opposite or opposed. And one, Rashi wouldn't know this, but one of the debates in Second Temple Judaism between the Dead Sea sect and the people in charge of the temple was whether on the holidays in Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, when it says when the text sometimes says al olata tamid, and other times says milvad olata tamid, whether those are the same or different meanings. And the Dead Sea text thought when it says al olata tamid, that means not to do the daily sacrifice. But I don't think you could read this verse any other way than meaning with, or connected to.
Or the al and olata tamid could also be like in al as an in addition to, right? So
right. That's how we understand it.
Right.
But apparently not how the Dead Sea sect understood it.
But if you put that in addition to into this al, it makes sense there, right? You should roast it, its head, in addition to its legs, in addition to its innards, meaning all of it.
Yes. But
Kathy?
So the translation here is the all its flesh whole. And if Saperstein's saying you can't say take the with, then it would be more to the whole animal. Keep the animal whole and roast it.
Correct. Yeah, roasting it as an entire animal as opposed to its component parts separated, except for the mayayim having been taken out, washed, and put back in. Taxidermy.
I was clarifying that the footnote that Alan read was not to our verse, but to the verse in chapter 6.
Oh, on Al Tzivotam. Got it. Thank you. Okay. Shkoyach to Rebecca. Sandy, are you a place where you can read a verse? Do you want to read verse 10? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Tova, do you want to read verse 10? Let's give her a microphone. I don't see Renee's hand raised.
Yeah, Renee had her hand up.
Renee, you have your hand up?
I was just volunteering to read it if you want me to read it.
Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead, Renee.
ולא תותירו ממנו עד בוקר ונותר ממנו עד בוקר באש תשרפו.
Okay.
Don't leave any of it until the morning. And what's left until the morning should be burned in the fire.
Good. Okay. Totir from yoter, from hoter, meaning extra. This is in like a hefil form, or maybe not exactly hefil, but I think it's hefil, lehotir. Do not let any of it remain until the morning, and that which is left from it, mimenu, until the morning, ba'esh, in fire, the same matrix in which it was supposed to be cooked, tisrofa, burn it here, not to be roasted, but burn it to be eliminated. Okay. Okay. Questions on the verse, comments on the verse before we look at Rashi. Rebecca.
Well, isn't it just contradicting itself right away? It says, don't let anything remain until morning. But if something's remaining, this is what you do.
Right. Don't mix meat and milk. And if a little bit of meat falls into milk, this is how you handle it, right? So I'm not sure if it's a contradiction as much as saying this is the ideal. And if some does get left over, lest you think, yeah, I know I was supposed to eat it last night, I didn't finish it, but there is some leftover, so might as well eat it. No, right? You're positively obligated to make sure nothing gets left over. And if anything does, it becomes forbidden for you to do anything to it other than burn it. Anything else on the verse itself? Rashi always looks for redundancies, which we might not think of as redundant. Is there anything potentially redundant in the verse? Boker, right? So once we're told in the thou shalt not leave any of it over until morning, when you get to v'hanotar, and anything which is left over, we know that means left over in morning. So why do we have the ad boker a second time? We might not think that is redundant, but Rashi's going to, and that's why I'm pointing that out. Anything else on the verse that you want to comment on? Okay, what time is it? 28. Okay, Renee, why don't you start reading the V'hanotar mimenu?
Ma Talmud lomar, v'hanotar mimenu ad boker.
Two more words.
Ten boker al boker.
Wait.
Right?
Start again. Uma Talmud lomar.
Ma Talmud lomar, v'hanoter mimenu ad boker, liten boker al boker.
I wonder if you have a different text than I have. I've got Uma Talmud lomar ad boker, pam shniya. Do you not have the words pam shniya, Renee?
After that, I have ad boker pam shniya.
Right. Okay. So ma Talmud lomar, the word Talmud here does not mean Talmud. It means what is it coming to teach us? Where we have the phrase ad boker, until the morning, pam shniya, a second time. Okay. Let's do this because I know there was a meeting that they wanted to have in here. There must have been a scheduling mistake and they're anxious to get in. Let's hold it here. We'll pick up the Renee next week. And let's exit this room as quick as we possibly can. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to www.tbala.org.